Colonial Career and Technical Center, construction trades area. Today, we're going to continue our series on shop safety and machine safety. We're going to talk about the planer. After we have a board that we've rough cut to length on the sliding compound miter, jointed a face if the board isn't too wide, jointed an edge, we can then take the board to the planer to flatten the other side and produce parallel thickness, one of the dimensions we're trying to produce when making a square board.
Before we start running any equipment, we must remember to put on our safety glasses. Hearing protection is also recommended and available, just ask the teacher. As far as other safety precautions, closed-toe shoes and pulling your hair back are a good idea, and any of the other things that we mentioned in our shop safety packet. There are many important measurements to remember when operating the planer, but one of the most important is the safe amount to take off in one pass. This is 1/16 of an inch, or one revolution of the wheel on the side that raises the bed. Other important measurements to remember while operating the planer is the maximum width, or the distance from edge grain to edge grain across the face of a board. In our planer is 22 inches, and that's determined by the width of our cutter head. Another measurement to remember is the minimum length. The shortest board that we can run through our planer, end grain to end grain, is 12 inches. If we send a board shorter than 12 inches through the planer, we risk it getting stuck or possibly shooting back out of the machine. So never run a board under 12 inches through the planer. Finally, if you're planing a board down and it requires you to go less than 1/4 of an inch, you can only plane to 1/4 of an inch thick, and then you must move to another machine to finish to your final thickness. Now that we know the important measurements for a planer, let's look at its parts. The diagram here is similar to the one on your planer information sheet. In this diagram, it shows a board moving left to right through the machine, passing all the parts needed to take off 1/16 of an inch. The first part it comes to is the anti-kickback fingers. These fingers are designed to try to protect the operator in the case that the board is grabbed and thrown out of the machine. In case this happens, we shouldn't stand behind the infeed table. These fingers are designed to stop a kickback, but they may not. The next part in the planer are the infeed roll and anti-friction roll. The infeed roll and anti-friction roll are responsible for grabbing the board and feeding it in through the machine initially, and maintains contact the whole way through. The next part that the board will come to is the pressure bar and chip breaker. The chip breaker is just barely touching the cutter head, and as a chip is produced, it breaks it off. Without this chip breaker, the board would tear out from one end to the other. After the chip breaker, the board then comes in contact with the cutter head. The cutter head is a cylinder wrapped with indexable carbide knives. These knives are used to shave little chips of wood off the top of the board. This produces the parallel thickness because the space between the cutter head and the machine table are uniform the whole way across. After the board passes the cutter head, it then is approached by the pressure bar. The pressure bar keeps the board pressed flat against the table to keep a nice uniform smooth surface. The board then is grabbed and pulled through the machine the rest of the way by the outfeed roller and another anti-friction roll. The anti-friction rolls are located underneath the board and can be adjusted to allow a board that is rough sawn to be planed. Ideally, a board should be jointed before it runs through the planer, but if it's too wide, we may have to run it through the planer rough. To do this, we adjust the bed rolls up 0.05 inches, plane our board, and then after we have one flat side, we lower it back down to 0 and continue our process. Now that we know the important parts and measurements on the planer, let's get ready to plane. The first thing we must do is turn on our dust collection system. Anytime we're running equipment in the shop, we must turn this on to get dust out of the building. Before we run our board through any machine, we check for metal or loose knots to make sure that they won't damage the machine. Before we turn on the planer, we must check to see our board thickness and make sure that we have everything set. You can either do this with a tape measure or how I'm doing it here, lowering the table until the board fits through. Once you know the board fits through, you can release the stop knob and press in the start button to turn on the machine. With the planer on, now I slowly raise the bed until the board is fed through the machine by itself. I hold it until it's about halfway through. With longer boards, you want to hold them until they're halfway through so that they don't produce a snipe. The first pass, you see, it took a little bit off the middle. It has a little bit on the edge to take off. Raise the bed one turn, 1/16 of an inch, and feed it through again. After the board is halfway through, I grab it on the outfeed side, come back to check again. This time I just have a little bit more to take off, so one more turn and we'll be good to go here. Feeding the board through, watching for pinch points between the board and the table or the board and the top of the machine. After the board comes out, this time we have a completely surface board and it's good to go. We'll hit the stop button and then we'll go over and turn off the dust collection if nobody else is using equipment. Sometimes when we're planing, a board gets stuck. There's 3 steps you must take to remove your board from the planer safely. The first is to turn the planer off and then wait for it to stop. Once it's stopped, you lower the table and remove your board. If maintenance needs to be performed on any of our machines, we must first unplug them. Our planer, on the other hand, is a special case. It has a transformer and this special shut-off switch. If you're going to do maintenance, which you won't as a student, you need to turn off power first before you can open up any compartments on any machine. Here I'm loosening the bolts on the front so that I can lift up the lid and check the indexable carbide heads on the inside to make sure that they're in good shape. They're okay, so I'm going to shut the lid, tighten the bolts back up, and then I'm ready to go. You as a student should not have to do this, but it's a general habit to get into to make sure that anytime you're changing blades or inspecting something to unplug or turn off power to a machine before you start. Now that it's all buttoned back up, I can go back to the breaker, flip it up, and I'm good to go. With all the important information we've learned about the planer so far, including the important measurements, the parts, how to operate, and how to safely work on the planer, one of the other important things we need to cover is when it is not safe to plane a board. One reason you may not be able to join a board is because of metal or loose knots. Metal can become dislodged in the machine and damage the cutter head, and knots may become dislodged and shoot out and damage the machine as well. Another reason you may not be able to plane a board is because of warp. Warp is any one of these examples: a bow, a crook, a kink, cup, or twist. Any of these deformities in your board may keep you from being able to safely plane your board to the desired thickness.